My name is Evan. I'm 23 years old, and the story I'm going to tell you is a true story, which I experienced personally in December of 2017. More precisely, December 21st, 2017. At this point, I was 18. I'd just gotten my license, and I was the happiest young man in the world. It was almost Christmas, and the whole family had arranged to meet up at my paternal grandmother's house in the southwest of France. I was the last one to arrive. Everyone was already there, and they were all waiting for me, so I had to take the trip all alone. It was December 21st at 6:30 a.m. I had prepared all my things the day before. I got up at 5 a.m. sharp so everything would be perfectly ready for departure. I was just about to close the door behind me when something disturbed me. Indeed, a very creepy little melody could be heard in the distance. It was a piece of music exactly like that of an American ice cream truck. The sound was muffled though and crackled like it was emerging from a small radio from the 1950s. At the time, I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside my house or outside. I would like to point out the house was empty, in complete darkness, and there was no reason for a melody like this to be heard at 6:30 in the morning. I even wondered if it wasn't just my imagination playing a trick on me. It was when I went back into the house to make sure the music wasn't coming from inside that it stopped immediately, dead in its tracks. I told myself it must indeed be my imagination playing a trick on me. How else could it stop so perfectly? I grabbed up my things, closed the door, and left for my car parked down the street. While I was walking towards my car, though, I peeked down a street corner and saw an old ice cream truck turning into another street, which led out to the forest. I didn't ask myself many more questions than that. It was too odd a sight. I just told myself the music I thought I'd heard from the house must have come from this truck instead. It was an American-style ice cream truck in very poor condition, which sporadically played the music I'd heard a few minutes earlier. I would like to point out once more, it was completely dark and 6:30 in the morning. This truck was driving all alone in my small village in the Paris region. This may seem stupid to you, but once again, I writ it off at the time. After putting my things in the trunk, I started the car and waited for 5 minutes for everything to warm up. And this time, the truck had gone around my village and therefore arrived on my street. As it passed by my car, all the lights turned on and the music stopped when it drove past me. The person driving was a man in his 60s, bearded and extremely dirty looking. He gave me an ominous look and continued on his way. That event alone already made my blood run cold. Unfortunately, it was only the beginning. I took to the road quite frightened, but I didn't have any problems until my first stop after a little while. I stopped at a highway rest area to refuel my car. I entered the station, went to the toilet, bought myself a coffee, and went outside to light a cigarette. While I was going to throw away my coffee, my body froze when I heard the music of the ice cream truck on the other side of the station. I immediately understood what was happening to me. The old man had followed me here. I ran to my car, put it in first gear, and sped off. I had time to take a quick look at the place where the music was coming from, and I indeed was able to catch a glimpse of the ice cream truck I had seen back home. The man was already behind the wheel watching me leave. It was now 11 a.m. Daylight had broken, and so did the fog. The atmosphere was quite heavy. You couldn't see 100 meters in front of you. For these reasons, a big traffic jam had formed. Imagine my state when in a thick fog, I was forced to stop the car with the idea of being followed by an old man in a creepy ice cream truck. I knew it was getting serious when I looked back and saw he was only 10 cars behind me. He knew I was there, and he started his music with the sole aim of freaking me out. I didn't take my eyes off him for a single second. My gaze was fixated on him in my rearview mirror. When the traffic started again, I rushed forward with the sole aim of losing him. The whole rest of the way, I looked behind me just to see if he was still following me. After an 8.5-hour journey, I finally arrived at my grandmother's house. I hadn't seen the truck since the 11 a.m. traffic jam. To make matters worse, my grandmother lived in a small village of only 150 inhabitants. Each house was spaced about 200 meters from each other, surrounded by very scary and thick black forest. When I arrived, I dropped off my things, said hello to my family, and told my cousins directly what happened to me. My cousins were Pierre and Antoine. Pierre was the tallest. He was a handsome man of 28 years old, stocky and well-bearded. Antoine is 20. He's smaller than us, but is very funny. At first, they thought I was playing a joke on them, since we used to tell each other scary stories whenever we got together. They saw the fear on my face, though, and knew I wasn't joking. We decided to wait a while before going for a walk in the middle of the night in the scary forest, as we liked to call it when we were little. To be honest, after what happened to me, I was quite reluctant, but I accepted to please them. Even if we knew this forest quite well, it still lived up to its name. In the middle of December, the fog that had rolled in made the atmosphere even heavier. We set off with our 3 flashlights, our down jackets, and a few beers. Our goal was an old lumberjack's cabin, abandoned for around 20 years. It had served as a landmark for us since our earliest childhood. It was a 15-minute walk from our grandmother's house, in a straight line pretty much. On the way, they asked me more details about what I had experienced. I told them everything, and even managed to make them shiver. Pierre was in the front, me in the middle, and Antoine behind. Pierre stopped abruptly. He was frozen, as if paralyzed, and asked us to move back immediately. He told us he'd seen a figure moving in the darkness. He described the figure to us as an old man of 60 years, bearded and extremely dirty. His description made my blood run cold. It exactly matched the description of the man who had followed me from my house. Their faces fell. The 3 of us started running towards the cabin, hoping to be safe. We rushed inside and closed the door behind us. We turned the lights off and laid down on the floor. After remaining 10 minutes there without moving, a shiver of fear ran through my entire body. The sound of the music truck had just started. I was having a panic attack. My cousins understood that this must have been the music of the famous ice cream truck seller who was following me. We were still lying there, the music getting closer to where we were. We could hear it circling around the cabin. Fortunately, the ice cream truck man did not try to enter. We stayed like that for 2 hours, in the dark, waiting. After 2 hours, we thought he was gone. We set off towards home, our hearts beating 1,000 miles an hour. The way seemed extremely long, even though only 15 minutes separated us from the home. Out of our 3 flashlights, only one was working perfectly. That's when a noise behind us froze all 3 of us. Pierre, who was the only one with a working flashlight, turned around and saw the man standing about 10 meters from us. He started chasing us. In one hand he had a big knife, and in the other he had a small flashlight. There was a sort of small radio around his neck, from which the truck music was coming out. We ran for a good 10 minutes with this man chasing us. We finally arrived at a house that was lit. All 3 of us entered without knocking, shouting we were being chased. The family inside, obviously scared to see us enter like this, began freaking out. Without taking the time to explain to them the situation, we all looked out the window, and that's where we saw him for the last time. He was there between the trees, his flashlight pointed at his face, and his knife in his other hand. From there, we could feel the hatred emanating from his black gaze. The father, now having seen the scene, called the police immediately, who arrived in 20 minutes. We all testified and an investigation was opened, but the man has not been found to this date. Here I am 5 years later, living my life with the fear of seeing that man again one day. I asked myself a lot of questions. Why did he choose me? What could I have possibly done to him? How did he even follow me here? And how did he know we were going into the forest? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but what I do know is that this man is probably still wandering around to this day in his creepy ice cream truck. My name is Lena. I'm 22 years old, but my story began when I was 17. At my parents' work, there was a new colleague that started working there. He was 21 years old, I believe. Let's call him Pierre. He'd arrived from the other side of France. As he didn't know anyone in the area, my parents tried to invite him over so he wouldn't feel so alone on the weekends. At the beginning, everything went well. There was no problems, really. He was nice, and we actually got along quite well. During some discussions with my mother, he told her that he had horses where he lived before, and coincidentally, we also had 2 horses at home. I was looking for someone to help me with them. He started coming over regularly, supposedly for the horses, but I'm sure you can see where this was going. At the time, I did not have a good relationship with my parents. We often argued. In short, I liked going to see my horses to have peace of mind. Except for on the weekends, Pierre came for full afternoons with the horses, and I had to wait for him to leave to have my alone time. He would stay for 7 hours without really doing anything. That's when I began to understand that he was coming really for me. Instinctively, I started to distance myself from him. I barely said hello to him whenever he came, and I started to try and avoid him. What's more, when I started working on my bachelor's, I went to live in an apartment far away from my studies. I still came home on the weekends, though. I was studying to be a vet, so I had quite a lot of work. I barely went to see my horses at all, and stayed in my room on the weekends, so Pierre didn't really get to see me anymore. I don't know when this started happening or why it even occurred to him that this was appropriate, but he would come straight to my room and say hello to me without warning, even though I wanted to be left alone. I told my mother to tell him to leave me be, and that he didn't have to come like that just to see me. She did, but every time as soon as her back was turned, he would barge in and not leave my side, even though I told him I had to be alone. He offered me trips to the movies, bowling, to come and eat at his house to take my mind off things. I refused. I was already in a relationship anyway. He knew this but continued to propose to me every week. All week when I was gone, he would send constant messages trying to talk to me. I'd leave him on read, but he continued, so much so that I had to block him on everything. He managed to get my number out of my mother for a so-called urgent problem, though. That was how, for the next 2 years of prep school, it came to the point I could no longer go home to my parents anymore. My boyfriend and I broke up during the summer after my prep school finished. Somehow, Pierre found out about this. He was right there waiting for me in his car in front of my house to see whenever I was going to go out. If I had the misfortune of going out with a friend, he would start harassing me with constant calls. I had a summer job in a store, and he would drive in 3 times a week to see me. I would always hide in the break room. He would ask my colleagues where I was, and wait for me to come out for hours. It was hell. During this summer, 2021, so fairly recent, my parents went on vacation for 2 weeks without me, as I was going to be doing a lot of work. I was alone at home with my dogs. I came home late from work, and every evening, without exaggeration, his car would be parked right in front of my house. I lived in the countryside, so there was pretty much no chance of it being a random person squatting on the sidewalk out front or something. He pretended to take care of the horses, but as soon as I arrived home, he'd come knocking and asking for news, saying that he didn't want me to be alone. It was this week that the worst happened. I was in the bath after a long day. I hadn't seen his car yet, and it was 10 p.m. It was quite dark out, so I was sure he would not be bothering me today. One of the French doors was right on top of my bath. I had the bathroom door open just in case the dogs got lonely, so they could walk over to where I was. You should know my dogs never bark, except in cases of danger. They were lying on the mat next to me as I relaxed. While I was bathing though, they suddenly started getting agitated and growling and barking viciously. 5 seconds later, I heard a knock on the French window opposite to me. I don't know how long he had been there, but he was watching me while I was in the bath. I pretended not to notice him, and eventually he left. Until my parents returned from vacation though, I never slept home alone again. I had a friend over every evening. It was fortunate too, because he did try things again. One evening, I was in the pool outside with my friend at night. I heard a car pull up in front. He started coming towards us with a smile that was a little too cheerful. As soon as he saw I had a friend with me though, he froze, stopped smiling, and ran away. I don't know what he wanted to do, but I'm lucky I was not alone. My parents came home soon after. I burst into tears and told them everything. It was the worst thing in the world when they didn't believe me. They said I was making things up, that Pierre had been helpful to them, that they liked him a lot. Even though I told them he was only helping them to see me and to be seen in a good light, they still let him come over and nothing was done. Needless to say, it was not a fun summer. Back at school now, I left again. I would come home on weekends and little by little, I realized Pierre was coming by less and less often. So much the better. I found out 3 weeks ago that my parents had realized I was not lying. At their work, they heard Pierre saying to certain people, "Lena is the woman of my life. I won't let her go. She will be mine one day, no matter what I have to do." When they told him I already had someone I was dating and he had to move on, he replied directly to them, "Well, one day they won't be together. I'll just have to find a way to seduce her and bring her home. Everything will work out just fine." It's been 5 years since, and this guy has not stopped his obsession with me. I'm happy my parents take me seriously now at least, but that doesn't really protect me. I don't really have any idea what he's capable of. I'm afraid of being alone at home even with my dogs, and even in my apartment away from their house, far from him. I can't wait to move even further away. So for context, I moved into my new house about a year or two ago. I had lived in the area for a year before, but we were evicted due to the owners of our old house wanting to move in. I'm a young female, still living with my family, which makes this story even more weird. When you look out my window, you see my fence, then another house. They're up on a small hill though, so the fence doesn't really block anything. The first encounter I had with this man was late at night. I was with some friends while all our parents were out at a party. I will say that me and my friends are old enough to be left at home, and we were responsible. We were just relaxing in my room with no light or music on. We had turned the TV off and were all alone just chatting together. We heard my dog start barking for a good 10 minutes. We passed this off at first because she barks at absolutely anything. I'm talking birds on the power line, a bug flitting about on the front porch, anything that moves pretty much. We started hearing weirder noises though, like crunching circling the perimeter of my room and scratching on the walls. I kid you not, the moment we started to get scared, the loudest bangs I've ever heard started pounding on my glass door. Me and the 3 others ran out of my room to go look at what in the world could be making this much noise. We were greeted by an aggressive dog. This dog was right up on the glass, pounding against the door. My own dog was pretty scared. That was when we really saw it. A man dressed in all black just standing at the door. We were all perfectly still, but I guess my friend's flight response went off. As he jumped to lock the door, the man reached for it too. My friend yelled out to him, "What are you doing here? Who are you?" He responded with a simple, "I don't know." He walked off with his dog, who was on a leash. When our parents got back, we told them about the man, and they asked us why we didn't call them right away. Truthfully, I know we should have, but I didn't want to ruin the party. I've learned a lot since then. 2 days later, my mom confronted our neighbor who was out mowing the lawn. He admitted that it was him and that his dog had run into our gate and got around the back. He said he meant to come and talk to her earlier about it, but it had passed his mind. Alright, fair enough. I thought it was a normal enough story until I thought back to that night. The gate his dog supposedly ran through has a clasp that was shut on that night. We have it there so our own dog can't get out, and nothing can come in either. You have to open it by hand, meaning this man opened the gate and let himself and his dog in. My theory is he had heard the music stop and didn't see lights from our house, so he decided he was going to come and, rob us, I guess? The noises we heard must have been him, scouting the perimeter of my room for 10 minutes before attempting to enter. We filed a police report, but nothing happened for a few months, until one night. I was in bed almost asleep, still getting comfy. I sat up to rearrange my pillows and turned around so I could properly make it comfy. That was when I saw a face outside my window, staring in at me. Whoever it was wearing a black face covering. I texted my mom and froze. I heard moving and my mom came in and checked. The man was already gone. This wasn't just my imagination, as my neighbor's lights are visible from the crack in my curtain, but the face was covering up a majority of the light in that moment. Ever since then, I've noticed them watching me, and whenever I catch them looking in, they'll get up from their balcony and leave. I'll look away only to catch them in the same spot watching me again 5 minutes later.